Triceratops stands up to a T-Rex. Then something unbelievable happens. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The sun blazed high in the prehistoric sky, casting golden rays across the endless expanse of dense jungle and wide open plains. Massive ferns swayed gently in the warm breeze, their shadows dancing on the ground as a family of Triceratops grazed in peace. Among them was Tria, a young yet spirited Triceratops with a distinctive scar running down her right horn, a reminder of a close call with a velociraptor a few moons ago. Tria's herd moved slowly, their heavy footsteps shaking the ground as they browsed for food. Despite their calm demeanor, the air was thick with tension. Predators lurked everywhere in this dangerous world, and no one knew when the peace might be shattered. Tria was restless. She often wandered from the safety of her herd, drawn to the unknown. Her curiosity was both a gift and a curse. While it gave her courage, it also made her vulnerable. On this particular day, her adventurous spirit led her toward the edge of the forest, where the jungle gave way to a vast, sunlit clearing. The grasses here were taller, the air richer with the scent of wildflowers. She paused, her massive head lifting as she sniffed the air. Her senses told her something was off, but she couldn't pinpoint what. The silence was unnerving. No chirping of small prehistoric birds, no rustle of small creatures darting through the undergrowth. Just stillness. Tria's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but her curiosity won out. She stepped further into the clearing, her powerful legs crushing the tall grass beneath her. She didn't notice the pair of golden eyes watching her from the shadows of the forest. The T-Rex had been stalking the herd for hours, biding its time. Its powerful legs carried it silently through the jungle, its massive head low as it tracked the scent of prey. It was a young male, but already it had earned a fearsome reputation as a relentless hunter. The scars, much like Tria's, told a story of survival and dominance. The predator's eyes locked onto Tria, who had wandered too far from the safety of her herd. She was smaller than the others, and though she carried herself with a confidence that hinted at inner strength, she was still an easy target. The T-Rex's lips curled back in a silent snarl, revealing rows of sharp, glistening teeth. This was his moment. Tria felt it before she saw it. A shift in the air, a primal warning that sent a shiver down her spine. She turned her head just in time to see the T-Rex step into the clearing, its massive frame towering over the grass. Its eyes burned with predatory intent, and its deep, guttural growl sent a shockwave through the earth. For a moment, Tria froze. Fear coursed through her veins, but she quickly shoved it aside. She had been in danger before, and she knew that hesitation could mean death. Her heart pounded as she lowered her head, her horns glinting in the sunlight. She let out a loud bellow, a warning that she was not an easy meal. The T-Rex paused, clearly taken aback by her defiance. Most prey would have bolted by now, but Tria stood her ground. The predator took a step forward, testing her resolve. Tria scraped the ground with her front foot, her muscles tensing as she prepared for what was to come. Suddenly, the roar of her herd echoed through the clearing. They had heard her bellow and were thundering toward her, their combined strength a formidable force. The T-Rex hesitated, its golden eyes narrowing as it weighed its options. It was strong, but even it knew better than to take on an entire herd of Triceratops. But Tria didn't retreat to the safety of her herd. She stayed where she was, her gaze locked on the predator before her. Her boldness was electrifying, a challenge that the T-Rex couldn't ignore. The herd's approach slowed as they watched from the edge of the clearing, uncertain whether to intervene. The T-Rex let out an ear-splitting roar, the sound vibrating through Tria's bones. But she didn't flinch. She took a step forward, her horns gleaming like weapons of war. The T-Rex crouched slightly, its muscles coiling like springs, ready to strike. The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity, the tension so thick it seemed to stop time itself. But just as the T-Rex was about to charge, a distant rumble shook the ground. Both predators and prey paused, their heads turning toward the horizon. The rumble grew louder, the earth trembling beneath their feet. Tria's herd bellowed in alarm, retreating further into the jungle. A wall of fire appeared in the distance, roaring toward them with terrifying speed. The forest was ablaze, the flames consuming everything in their path. Birds scattered into the sky, their cries echoing above the crackling inferno. The T-Rex let out a growl of frustration, its hunt interrupted by a force of nature. Tria hesitated, torn between fleeing with her herd and staying to face the predator before her. But the fire was closing in fast, and instinct took over. She turned and bolted toward the jungle, her powerful legs carrying her away from the flames. The T-Rex followed, not as a hunter but as a creature driven by survival. The fire didn't discriminate, it was an equal threat to them both. As they ran side by side through the jungle, their rivalry was momentarily forgotten. They were no longer predator and prey. They were simply two beings trying to escape the unstoppable force behind them. The ground shook beneath their feet as Tria and the T-Rex barreled through the dense jungle, the roar of the wildfire growing louder with every passing second. The once vibrant forest was now cloaked in smoke, the air thick and suffocating. Tria's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, her instincts screaming at her to keep going. The T-Rex ran just behind her, its massive body weaving through the trees with surprising agility. Flames licked at the edges of the jungle, consuming everything in their path. Trees cracked and fell, their branches collapsing in fiery cascades. The heat was unbearable, the fire a living, breathing monster that devoured all in its way. Tria could feel its relentless pursuit, and though her legs ached, she didn't dare slow down. The T-Rex let out a low growl, its frustration evident. This was not how it had planned its day. A simple hunt had turned into a desperate race for survival. But even as it ran, its sharp eyes darted toward Tria, studying her. This Triceratops was different, fearless and determined in a way the predator had rarely seen. For a moment it almost admired her resolve. The two dinosaurs burst into a clearing, their breaths ragged and heavy. The flames were gaining on them, and the smoke was growing thicker, making it harder to see. Tria skidded to a stop, her eyes scanning the clearing for a way out. She spotted a narrow path that led uphill, away from the fire. Without hesitation, she charged toward it, her horns cutting through the foliage. The T-Rex followed, its powerful legs propelling it forward. The incline was steep, the ground uneven and littered with rocks. Tria stumbled but quickly regained her footing, her determination unshaken. The T-Rex, built for brute strength, struggled slightly on the slope, its claws digging into the earth for traction. As they climbed higher, the air grew slightly cooler, the smoke thinning. The fire was still a threat, but the elevation gave them a temporary reprieve. Tria slowed her pace, her sides heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She glanced back at the T-Rex, her eyes narrowing. For the first time, she had the chance to truly assess her unlikely companion. The T-Rex stood a few paces away, its massive chest rising and falling as it panted heavily. Its scales glistened with sweat, and its golden eyes were sharp and calculating. Tria lowered her head slightly, her horns pointing toward the predator in a silent warning. She hadn't forgotten what he was, or what he had tried to do. The T-Rex let out a low growl, but it didn't move closer. Instead, it tilted its head, as if studying her. The tension between them was palpable, a fragile truce born out of necessity rather than trust. Tria stomped her foot, the ground beneath her trembling slightly. "Don't even think about it," her body language seemed to say. But before either could make another move, the sound of crashing trees drew their attention. The fire was closing in again, its flames consuming the jungle below them. Tria and the T-Rex exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever their differences, they needed each other to survive this. With a loud snort, Tria turned and began climbing again, the T-Rex following close behind. The path grew narrower, the rocky terrain giving way to a steep cliffside. To their left, the ground dropped away into a deep ravine, its depths obscured by smoke. To their right, the forest stretched endlessly, the fire now a glowing wall of destruction. Tria's heart pounded as she carefully navigated the treacherous path. The rocks beneath her feet were loose, threatening to give way with every step. The T-Rex, though larger and heavier, moved with surprising grace, its tail swaying for balance. The two dinosaurs moved in tandem, their survival instincts taking over. They reached a plateau, a flat expanse of rock that offered a momentary respite. Tria collapsed onto the ground, her sides heaving as she gulped in the fresher air. The T-Rex stood nearby, its massive frame casting a long shadow over her. For a moment they simply rested, the danger below momentarily forgotten. But the silence didn't last long. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the canyon, sending a chill down Tria's spine. She lifted her head, her eyes scanning the horizon. The T-Rex growled low in its throat, its body tensing as it turned toward the sound. From the smoke-filled depths of the ravine, a new threat emerged. It was massive, its leathery wings beating the air with thunderous force. The creature's scales shimmered in shades of red and gold, its eyes glowing like molten lava. A dragon. Tria's eyes widened in disbelief. She had heard stories of such creatures, whispered tales passed down through generations of her herd. But she had never believed they were real until now. The dragon let out a deafening roar, its flames lighting up the sky as it soared toward them. The T-Rex roared in response, its powerful legs stomping the ground as it prepared for a fight. Tria hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere to go. The cliff behind them offered no escape, and the dragon was too fast to outrun. The dragon landed with a thunderous crash, its wings folding against its body as it towered over them. Its gaze shifted between Tria and the T-Rex, its lips curling back to reveal rows of sharp, glistening teeth. It let out a low growl, the sound vibrating through the ground. The T-Rex took a step forward, its body coiled like a spring. Tria watched in awe as the predator faced the dragon without hesitation, its golden eyes blazing with determination. But she knew even the mighty T-Rex couldn't take on such a creature alone. With a deep breath, Tria rose to her feet, her horns gleaming in the firelight. She let out a loud bellow, the sound echoing across the plateau. The T-Rex glanced back at her, surprise flickering in its eyes. Tria stomped her foot, her message clear. "We fight together." The dragon roared again, its flames scorching the ground as it lunged toward them. The T-Rex charged, its massive jaws snapping at the dragon's wings. Tria followed, her horns aimed at the dragon's side. The two dinosaurs worked in unison, their movements coordinated as though they had fought together all their lives. The battle was fierce, the ground shaking with every clash of titans. The dragon lashed out with its claws, its flames lighting up the night sky. But Tria and the T-Rex were relentless, their combined strength a force to be reckoned with. Tria's horns found their mark, grazing the dragon's side and drawing a stream of fiery blood. The T-Rex lunged for the dragon's neck, its teeth sinking into the scales with a ferocity that shook the air. The dragon reared back, its wings beating furiously as it tried to take flight. But the combined efforts of Tria and the T-Rex kept it grounded, their attacks driving it further toward the edge of the plateau. With one final, deafening roar, the dragon spread its wings and launched itself into the air, retreating into the smoke-filled sky. Tria and the T-Rex stood side by side, their bodies battered but unbowed. The plateau was silent once more, the only sound their labored breaths. Tria glanced at the T-Rex, a newfound respect gleaming in her eyes. The predator looked back at her, its golden gaze softening. For a moment, they were no longer predator and prey. They were survivors, unlikely allies brought together by the chaos of the prehistoric world. And though they would part ways soon, this moment of unity would remain etched in their memories forever. The silence after the dragon's retreat felt deafening. Tria stood frozen, her massive chest heaving with each breath. The air around them was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burned vegetation, but the plateau where they stood felt like a sanctuary, far removed from the chaos below. For the first time in hours, Tria allowed herself a moment to simply exist, her body trembling from exertion and adrenaline. The T-Rex stood beside her, its golden eyes fixed on the horizon where the dragon had disappeared into the smoke-filled sky. Its massive body was scarred from the battle, deep scratches running along its sides, but it still stood tall, exuding a quiet strength. Despite its predatory nature, Tria could see something in the creature she hadn't noticed before. A flicker of respect, perhaps even gratitude. It wasn't just a hunter now. It was a survivor just like her. Tria let out a low rumble, a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl, and turned her gaze toward the distant jungle below. The wildfire had calmed slightly, its flames less aggressive as they consumed the remnants of the forest. But the destruction was vast. Smoke rose in plumes, and the once lush greenery was now a charred wasteland. Tria's heart ached for the home she had lost, for the herd she had been forced to leave behind. The T-Rex shifted its weight, drawing Tria's attention. The predator's golden eyes met hers, and for a moment, they simply stared at one another. Tria's instincts told her to be wary, to remember that this creature was still a hunter. But something in the T-Rex's gaze reassured her. They had fought side by side, their lives intertwined in a way that transcended their natural roles. For now, at least, they were equals. The silence was broken by a distant rumble, the ground beneath them trembling slightly. Tria's head snapped up, her muscles tensing as she scanned the horizon. The T-Rex growled low in its throat, its tail swaying as it prepared for whatever new threat was approaching. But this time, the danger didn't come from the jungle or the sky. It came from the earth itself. The rumble grew louder, the ground shaking violently as cracks began to form along the edges of the plateau. Rocks tumbled into the ravine below, the sound echoing like thunder. Tria let out a warning bellow, her feet shifting to find stable ground. The T-Rex roared, its voice booming across the landscape as the plateau began to crumble beneath them. Tria moved quickly, her powerful legs propelling her toward the far end of the plateau where the ground seemed more stable. The T-Rex followed, its massive frame navigating the crumbling terrain with surprising agility. But the cracks were spreading rapidly, and the edge of the plateau was collapsing into the ravine with alarming speed. Just as Tria reached the far end, she heard a sharp crack behind her. She turned to see the T-Rex struggling to maintain its balance, one of its massive legs trapped in a jagged crevice. The predator roared in frustration, its claws scraping against the rock as it tried to free itself. Tria hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to run, to save herself while she still could. But something in her heart wouldn't let her leave the T-Rex behind. With a deep breath, Tria charged back toward the trapped predator. The ground beneath her shifted dangerously, but she pressed on, her resolve unshaken. She reached the T-Rex and lowered her head, her horns hooking beneath its leg as she pushed with all her strength. The T-Rex let out a startled growl, its golden eyes wide with shock. For a moment, the predator resisted, its instincts telling it not to trust her. But then it relented, shifting its weight to help her free its leg. With a final heave, Tria dislodged the T-Rex's leg from the crevice. The predator stumbled forward, its massive body nearly toppling over before it regained its balance. Tria stepped back, her sides heaving as she caught her breath. The T-Rex looked at her, its gaze unreadable. Then, to her surprise, it let out a low rumble. Not a growl, but a sound that almost resembled gratitude. The ground shook again, and Tria knew they had no time to waste. She let out a loud bellow, urging the T-Rex to follow her, and took off toward the far end of the plateau. The predator hesitated for only a moment before following, its powerful legs thundering against the rock. They reached the far edge just as the last of the plateau crumbled into the ravine. Tria skidded to a stop, her hooves kicking up dust as she looked down at the new terrain before them. The jungle had given way to a series of rolling hills, their grassy slopes dotted with small clusters of trees. The air was clearer here, the smoke from the wildfire dissipating as the wind carried it away. Tria and the T-Rex stood side by side, their breaths heavy as they took in the sight. It was a new world, untouched by the chaos they had left behind. For the first time, Tria felt a glimmer of hope. This could be a place to start over, to rebuild. But as she looked at the T-Rex, she knew their time together was coming to an end. The predator belonged to a different world, one of solitary hunts and dominance. Tria, on the other hand, was a creature of the herd, her instincts tied to the bonds of family and community. Their paths had crossed in a moment of necessity, but now they would diverge once more. The T-Rex seemed to sense this too. It turned its golden eyes toward her, its gaze softening. It let out a low rumble, a sound that Tria interpreted as a farewell. She nodded, her horns dipping slightly in acknowledgement. There were no words, no grand gestures, just a quiet understanding between two survivors who had faced the impossible together. The T-Rex stepped away, its massive frame blending into the shadows of the trees. Tria watched it go, her heart heavy but her spirit lifted. She turned her gaze back to the rolling hills and took her first steps toward the new land, her determination stronger than ever. As she descended the hill, a familiar sound reached her ears, the distant bellow of her herd. Tria's heart leapt, her pace quickening as she followed the sound. She crested a hill and saw them, a cluster of Triceratops grazing peacefully in the valley below. They had survived just as she had. Tria let out a loud bellow, her voice carrying across the valley. The herd turned, their eyes lighting up as they saw her. They moved toward her, their steps slow and deliberate, as though unsure if what they were seeing was real. When they finally reached her, they surrounded her, their horns brushing against her in a gesture of welcome. Tria closed her eyes, the warmth of her herd filling her with a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in days. She had faced fire, predators, and the unknown, but she had made it back. She opened her eyes and glanced back toward the forest, where the T-Rex had disappeared. She couldn't see it, but she felt its presence, a silent reminder of the bond they had shared. As the sun set over the valley, casting the world in hues of gold and orange, Tria stood tall among her herd. She had returned not just as a survivor, but as a leader, her courage and strength etched into the land she called home. And though the T-Rex was gone, its roar still echoed in her heart, a testament to the power of unlikely alliances in the face of unimaginable odds. The valley was serene, the kind of calm that felt almost unreal after the chaos of the last few days. Tria moved slowly through her herd, her presence greeted by soft grunts and gentle nudges. Her mother, a towering matriarch with battle-worn horns, was the first to approach. She let out a low bellow, her eyes filled with relief as she pressed her head gently against Tria's side. Tria closed her eyes and leaned into the touch, her heart swelling with emotion. She was home. The herd encircled her, their movements deliberate and protective. They had seen Tria wander before, but this time felt different. Her scarred horns, the ash clinging to her scales, and the exhaustion in her steps told them she had been through something extraordinary. Yet, amidst all this, she stood tall, her head held high. Tria's gaze drifted back to the hills she had descended. The faint outlines of the charred jungle loomed in the distance, a reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Her mind lingered on the T-Rex, its golden eyes flashing in her memory. Despite everything, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude toward the predator. It had been her enemy, her greatest threat, yet it had also become her ally when survival demanded it. The herd moved toward the heart of the valley, where a stream wound its way through lush grasses and clusters of wildflowers. Tria followed, her legs still heavy with fatigue. The cool water was a welcome relief as she bent down to drink, the liquid soothing her parched throat. Around her, the herd relaxed, their fear of the fire and predators momentarily forgotten. But even as Tria drank, her instincts remained sharp. The valley was beautiful, but it wasn't entirely safe. Predators would eventually find their way here, drawn by the promise of prey. The herd needed to remain vigilant, and Tria knew she had a role to play in ensuring their safety. The day passed slowly, the herd grazing and resting in the shadow of the hills. Tria stayed close to her mother, the older Triceratops radiating a calm strength that steadied her. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Tria felt a restlessness stirring within her. She wandered to the edge of the valley, her eyes scanning the hills. The memory of the dragon's roar, the wildfire's heat, and the T-Rex's thunderous steps played over and over in her mind. She had faced so much in such a short time, and yet she had survived. She had proven to herself that she was capable of more than she ever imagined. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Tria let out a low rumble, her thoughts shifting to the T-Rex. Had it found safety? Was it still alive somewhere beyond the hills? She would likely never know, but the connection they had shared, brief and improbable, would stay with her forever. Her quiet reflection was interrupted by a sudden sound. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper carried on the wind, but it was enough to set her on edge. She lifted her head, her ears swiveling to catch the noise. It came again, louder this time. A series of short, sharp growls, followed by the rustling of bushes. Tria's muscles tensed as she turned toward the source of the noise. Her eyes scanned the darkness, her heart pounding as the growls grew closer. She let out a warning bellow, her horns gleaming in the starlight. The herd, alerted by her call, began to stir, their heavy footsteps echoing through the valley. From the shadows of the hills, a pack of velociraptors emerged. Their sleek bodies moved with deadly precision, their sharp claws glinting as they fanned out to surround the herd. Tria's breath caught in her throat as she counted at least 5 of them, their glowing eyes fixed on their targets. The matriarch of the herd let out a deafening roar, rallying the others. The ground shook as the Triceratops formed a defensive circle, their horns lowered and ready to strike. Tria took her place beside her mother, her body trembling with both fear and determination. She had faced danger before, but this was different. The raptors were fast, cunning, and relentless. The lead raptor let out a shrill cry, and the pack lunged forward. The night erupted into chaos as the predators clashed with the Triceratops. The raptors darted in and out, their claws slashing at the herd's flanks, while the Triceratops swung their horns with deadly force. Tria watched as her mother charged at one of the raptors, her horns narrowly missing their target as the predator leapt out of the way. Tria's own fight began when a raptor lunged at her, its jaws snapping inches from her side. She swung her head, her horns slicing through the air. The raptor dodged and circled her, its movements quick and calculated. Tria let out a bellow, her feet stomping the ground as she kept her horns aimed at her attacker. The raptor darted forward again, its claws raking across her shoulder. Pain shot through her, but she didn't back down. She lunged, her horns catching the raptor's side and sending it sprawling to the ground. The predator scrambled to its feet, snarling, but it hesitated, clearly wary of her strength. Around her, the battle raged on. The herd fought valiantly, their horns gleaming as they defended themselves against the relentless raptors. Tria caught sight of her mother, who had managed to pin one of the predators against a tree, her horns pressing dangerously close to its chest. The raptor let out a high-pitched screech before fleeing into the darkness. Tria turned her attention back to her own fight, her body moving instinctively as the raptor circled her once more. This time, she didn't wait for it to strike. With a powerful charge, she lunged forward, her horns driving into the predator's side. The raptor let out a final cry before collapsing to the ground, its movements stilling. The remaining raptors, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. One by one, they disappeared into the shadows, their growls fading into the night. The herd stood victorious, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. Tria let out a triumphant bellow, her horns raised high. Around her, the herd echoed her call, their voices ringing out across the valley. They had faced the raptors and won, their unity and strength proving more powerful than the predator's cunning. As the adrenaline faded, Tria felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her. Her body ached, her shoulders stinging where the raptor's claws had struck. But despite the pain, she felt a sense of pride unlike anything she had ever known. She had stood her ground, fought alongside her herd, and emerged victorious. The herd regrouped near the stream, their movements slow and deliberate as they checked one another for injuries. Tria's mother approached her, her gaze softening as she took in the scratches and bruises on her daughter's body. She let out a low rumble, a sound that spoke of pride and relief. Tria leaned into her mother's touch, her heart swelling with emotion. As the night wore on, the valley grew quiet once more. The stars above shone brightly, their light casting a gentle glow over the herd. Tria lay down beside her mother, her body finally allowing itself to rest. She closed her eyes, the memories of the day swirling in her mind. And somewhere beyond the hills, deep in the shadows of the jungle, the T-Rex let out a low, rumbling roar. It was a sound of survival, of resilience, and perhaps even of respect, for the Triceratops that had stood its ground, faced the impossible, and emerged stronger than ever. The dawn arrived softly, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. The aftermath of the previous night's battle was evident in the herd's slow movements and the quiet resolve etched into their every step. Tria awoke to the gentle warmth of the rising sun on her scales, her body sore but her spirit steady. Her mother stood nearby, grazing on the lush grasses, her presence a grounding force that reminded Tria she was safe. For now. Tria stretched her legs and took a few cautious steps, wincing slightly as the claw marks on her shoulder tugged at her skin. The raptors had been relentless, their sharp claws and cunning tactics leaving marks not only on her body but also in her mind. Yet despite the pain, she felt stronger, wiser. She had stood against the predators, protected her herd, and survived. There was power in that knowledge. The herd moved slowly toward the stream, their massive forms casting long shadows over the soft grass. Tria followed, her gaze lingering on the horizon where the hills gave way to the remnants of the jungle. Smoke still rose in the distance, faint but persistent, a reminder of the wildfire that had driven her here. The memory of the T-Rex flickered in her mind, its golden eyes and thunderous roar as vivid as ever. She wondered if the predator had found safety or if it still roamed the charred jungle, searching for a place to call its own. The thought sent a ripple of unease through her, but it was quickly replaced by something unexpected: gratitude. The T-Rex had been her greatest threat, yet in the chaos of survival, it had become her ally. They had fought side by side, two creatures bound by necessity, and though their paths had diverged, the connection they had shared lingered. As Tria bent down to drink from the stream, her reflection stared back at her from the clear water. Her scarred horns and scratched hide told a story of resilience, of battles fought and lessons learned. She had changed not just in appearance but in spirit. She was no longer the curious wanderer who strayed too far from her herd. She was a fighter, a protector, and perhaps even a leader. The sound of splashing water drew her attention, and she looked up to see the young members of the herd playing near the stream. They stomped and bellowed, their energy infectious as they splashed each other with water. Tria's heart softened at the sight. Despite the dangers that surrounded them, life went on. The young ones laughed and played, their innocence a reminder of what the herd fought to protect. Tria's mother approached, her footsteps heavy but deliberate. She nudged Tria gently with her massive head, her eyes filled with pride. Tria rumbled in response, the bond between them unspoken but deeply felt. Her mother had always been a pillar of strength, and now Tria felt herself stepping into that role as well. She wasn't just part of the herd. She was becoming a vital piece of its survival. As the day wore on, the herd moved deeper into the valley, searching for new grazing grounds. The landscape was breathtaking, with rolling hills, vibrant wildflowers, and the occasional grove of ancient trees. But even amidst the beauty, Tria remained vigilant. The attack from the raptors had been a stark reminder that danger could strike at any moment, and she wasn't about to let her guard down. Her ears twitched at the sound of rustling grass, and she turned her head sharply. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of movement. The herd sensed her tension and slowed their pace, their collective awareness heightening. But after a few tense moments, the rustling stopped, and the valley returned to its serene stillness. Tria exhaled slowly, her muscles relaxing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching them, but for now there was no immediate threat. She glanced at her mother, who met her gaze with a knowing look. The matriarch seemed to understand Tria's unease, her presence a silent reassurance that they would face whatever came together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the valley, the herd settled in a wide clearing. The young ones played nearby, their energy seemingly endless, while the older members rested in the shade of the trees. Tria found herself a spot near the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the hills in the distance. The faint outline of the jungle was still visible, its smoky remnants blending with the horizon. She thought of the dragon, its fiery roar and molten eyes seared into her memory. It had been a force of nature, a predator unlike any other she had faced. Yet even it had been driven away, its dominance challenged by the unlikely alliance of a Triceratops and a T-Rex. The memory filled her with a mix of awe and disbelief. How had she survived that? How had they survived that? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound that made her heart skip a beat. It was faint but unmistakable, a low, rumbling growl that sent a chill down her spine. She turned her head sharply, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. The herd stirred, their collective unease palpable as the growl came again, louder this time. From the shadowed hills a massive figure emerged. Tria's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the creature. The T-Rex. It stood at the edge of the valley, its golden eyes scanning the herd with a predatory intensity. The herd froze, their movements halting as they faced the threat. The matriarch let out a warning bellow, her horns lowered in a show of defiance. The younger members of the herd huddled closer, their small forms shielded by the larger adults. Tria's heart raced as she stepped forward, placing herself between the T-Rex and her herd. Her horns gleamed in the fading light, her body tense and ready. She let out a loud bellow, a challenge to the predator that had once been her ally. The T-Rex growled low in its throat, its massive frame motionless as it stared at her. For a moment, the valley was silent, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Tria didn't flinch, her gaze locked on the predator's golden eyes. She was ready to fight, to protect her herd at all costs. But then, something unexpected happened. The T-Rex didn't charge. It didn't roar. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, its growl fading into silence. Tria blinked, her confusion evident as she watched the predator. The T-Rex took a single step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, and let out a sound that made her heart skip, a low, rumbling call that wasn't aggressive but almost gentle. Tria hesitated, her body trembling with uncertainty. The T-Rex was close enough now that she could see the scars on its hide, the signs of their shared battle against the dragon. Its golden eyes weren't filled with the cold calculation of a hunter but with something deeper, an acknowledgement, perhaps even a strange form of respect. The matriarch let out a warning bellow, but Tria didn't move. She held her ground, her gaze never leaving the T-Rex. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward, her horns lowered but not in submission. The two creatures faced each other, their forms silhouetted against the setting sun. The T-Rex let out another low call, and this time, Tria responded with a soft rumble of her own. The herd watched in stunned silence as the two creatures stood together, their connection unspoken but undeniable. For a moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath, the line between predator and prey blurred by something neither could fully understand. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the T-Rex turned and began to walk away. Its massive frame disappeared into the shadows of the hills, its golden eyes lingering on Tria for one final moment before vanishing completely. Tria stood motionless, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what had just happened, but she felt its significance deep in her bones. The herd gathered around her, their eyes wide with confusion and awe. The matriarch let out a low rumble, her gaze filled with questions Tria couldn't answer. As the stars began to dot the night sky, Tria lifted her head and let out a powerful bellow, her voice carrying across the valley. It was a sound of triumph, of survival, and of something far greater, a bond forged in fire, battle, and the unyielding will to live. The valley grew quiet again, but the air was charged with a kind of unspoken reverence. The herd began to move slowly, their heavy footsteps blending with the gentle rustle of the grasses. Tria lingered at the edge of the clearing, her gaze fixed on the hills where the T-Rex had disappeared. Her heart was still racing, her mind replaying the encounter. She had faced down a predator that could have destroyed her, yet somehow, they had shared a moment of understanding. It was as if the chaos of the past days had rewritten the rules of their world. The matriarch approached, her powerful form moving with the deliberate grace of a leader. She nudged Tria gently, her eyes searching for answers. Tria met her gaze, a soft rumble escaping her throat. There were no words she could offer, but the bond between them was enough. The matriarch seemed to understand, her horns dipping slightly in acknowledgement before she turned to lead the herd toward a nearby grove. Tria followed, her steps slow as she allowed herself to process everything that had happened. The grove was shaded and peaceful, the thick canopy of trees providing a sense of security. The younger members of the herd played in the dappled light, their high-pitched calls filling the air with a warmth that eased the tension of the day. The older Triceratops rested nearby, their massive bodies sprawled in the soft grass. Tria found a quiet spot beneath a sprawling tree, the bark rough against her side as she leaned against it. Her muscles ached, her shoulders still stinging from the raptor's claws, but her spirit felt lighter. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the herd wash over her. The memory of the T-Rex lingered at the edge of her thoughts, its golden eyes a haunting reminder of the bond they had formed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the valley was bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The stars began to emerge, their light shimmering like distant beacons. Tria's gaze drifted upward, the vastness of the night sky filling her with a sense of wonder. She had survived fire, predators, and the unknown, and now she stood here, alive and unbroken. The thought filled her with pride. The night deepened, and the herd settled into a quiet stillness. Tria lay curled beneath the tree, her body relaxed for the first time in days. But her rest was interrupted by a faint sound, barely audible over the gentle rustling of the wind. She lifted her head, her ears swiveling to catch the noise. It was a low rumble, rhythmic and deep, coming from the hills beyond the grove. Her heart quickened as she recognized the sound. It was the T-Rex. Tria hesitated, glancing toward the herd. They were calm, their breathing slow and steady as they slept. She knew she should stay, that her place was here with her family. But something compelled her to move. The bond she had formed with the T-Rex, however fleeting, was a thread she couldn't ignore. Rising to her feet, Tria moved silently through the grove, her steps careful so as not to wake the others. The night was cool against her scales, the grass soft beneath her feet. She reached the edge of the grove and paused, her gaze fixed on the hills. The rumble came again, steady and unthreatening, as if calling to her. With a deep breath, Tria stepped forward, her legs carrying her toward the sound. The hills rose before her, their slopes shrouded in shadow. The journey was slow, her steps cautious as she navigated the uneven terrain. The stars above provided just enough light to guide her, their glow reflected in her watchful eyes. As she crested a hill, the source of the sound came into view. The T-Rex stood in a small clearing, its massive frame illuminated by the soft light of the moon. It was still, its golden eyes fixed on the horizon. Tria paused, her heart pounding as she watched the predator. She had no idea why she had come or what she hoped to find, but something about the T-Rex's presence felt right. The predator turned its head slowly, its gaze locking onto hers. For a moment, neither moved. The world around them seemed to fade, the silence between them speaking louder than any roar. Tria lowered her head slightly, her horns glinting in the moonlight. The T-Rex let out a low rumble, the sound resonating through the still night. Cautiously, Tria stepped into the clearing, her movements deliberate and calm. The T-Rex didn't react, its body relaxed as it watched her approach. When she was close enough, she stopped, her head tilted slightly as she studied the predator. Its scars were more visible now, the moonlight highlighting the rough edges of its scales. It looked weary but strong, its presence commanding yet not threatening. The T-Rex let out another low rumble, its golden eyes softening. Tria responded with a quiet rumble of her own, her body language unguarded. They stood together, two creatures who had been enemies, allies, and now something in between. The connection between them was unspoken but deeply felt, a bond forged in survival and respect. The T-Rex moved first, lowering its massive head toward her. Tria held her ground, her breath hitching as the predator's snout brushed against her horns. It was a gesture she didn't fully understand but instinctively knew was significant. The T-Rex stepped back, its golden eyes meeting hers one last time before it turned and began to walk away. Tria watched it go, her heart heavy yet full. She didn't follow. This was its world, a place of solitude and strength. Her place was with her herd, protecting and leading them. But the T-Rex had given her something she hadn't expected, a reminder of her own courage and the power of unexpected alliances. As the predator disappeared into the shadows, Tria turned and began the journey back to the grove. The night was quiet, the stars above guiding her steps. She reached the edge of the grove just as the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. The herd was waking, their movements slow and deliberate as they rose to greet the new day. Tria's mother approached, her eyes scanning her daughter with a mixture of curiosity and relief. Tria let out a soft rumble, brushing her horns gently against her mother's side. There were no words to explain where she had been or why, but her mother seemed to understand. As the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the valley, Tria stood with her herd. The challenges of the past days had left their mark, but they had also made her stronger. She was no longer just a part of the herd. She was a leader, a protector, and a survivor. And though the T-Rex was gone, its presence lingered in her heart. It was a reminder that even in the wildest, most dangerous corners of the world, connections could be forged, boundaries crossed, and respect earned. Tria lifted her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The future was uncertain, but she was ready for whatever it held. The valley was alive with the sounds of the herd, their calls echoing through the hills. Tria let out a powerful bellow, her voice joining theirs in a chorus of triumph and unity. The world was vast and unpredictable, but she had found her place within it, a place of strength, courage, and unbreakable bonds.